The elderly lady came out of the store, grabbed her heavy bags, and slowly walked toward her house. She lived far away, on the edge of the village, but she had to go downtown to the grocery store because there were no other stores nearby. Mrs. Bethany Fletcher lived alone. Her husband, Henry, passed away more than 10 years prior. They had no children together. Her late husband had a son, Andrew, but he had been missing for more than 15 years. Long ago, Mrs. Fletcher had heard rumors that he was serving his sentence in one prison and then in another since he was young, but no one knows whether this was true. Andrew ran away from home when he was a teenager. He couldn't accept his father's choice and couldn't forgive him for marrying Bethany after his mother died. And no matter how hard Bethany tried to make friends with the guy, it just didn't work out. She was in her 70s now, and it was too late to change anything in her life. The bags were too heavy. Mrs. Fletcher's hands shook, and she stopped to take a breath. She didn't seem to have bought much. Today she didn't feel well. There was something wrong with her blood pressure on her heart. She should not have gone to the store today, but unfortunately, she ran out of everything, even bread. She took a deep breath and slowly walked again, but before she could take even a few steps, a girl of about 7 years old ran up to her. "Let me help you," she offered and smiled. Mrs. Fletcher looked at the skinny child and shook her head. "Dear, the bags are too heavy for you. I'm an adult and much bigger than you, and even I feel so tired. And you are a little skinny girl. I'm afraid these bags are too heavy for you," said Mrs. Fletcher. "No, you're not an adult. You're senior. And I'm not little. I'm young and strong. I can already do everything," said the girl, taking the bags from the old lady's hands and diligently lifting them above the ground, walking down the sidewalk. "Well, thank you for your help," Mrs. Fletcher smiled, catching up with the girl. "But let's not walk too fast. I can't keep up with you. What's your name, my little helper?" "Daisy. I come here from the nearby village. Adam's drunk and fighting again. Eloise yells at him, and then they fight. She likes to drink alcohol, too." "But where are your mom and dad? Why are you living with Adam and Eloise?" Mrs. Fletcher asked. "I don't know where my dad is. I've never met him, and my mom died 2 years ago. Aunt Eloise is her sister. She took me in for foster care, but their place is terrible, and there's nothing to eat. I walked for a long time, and finally I came here," Daisy went on. "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that," Bethany sighed. "My name is Mrs. Fletcher, but you can call me Bethany." "I know," Daisy stopped abruptly. "You are the witch everyone is afraid of. Actually, I came to see you even though I was afraid. Mrs. Fletcher, I have a favor to ask of you. I want you to make Aunt Eloise and Adam stop drinking. Do you have such a spell? I'll work for it. I can do everything. I can go to the grocery store for you, work in the garden and clean the house. I will do anything you say," said the girl. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Daisy, but I can't do magic. They call me a witch in vain. Those silly people lie. I have cured some people, and they have recovered. People with different diseases still come to me, and I help them recover. But it is not magic. It is knowledge and skills. Let me explain it to you, and you will understand. Daisy, you're a clever girl. Tell me, do you know what massage is?" The girl nodded, and the old lady continued. "Well, I know how to massage using an ancient technique. People used this massage technique centuries ago, when there were no doctors and hospitals yet, and people recovered. I just help people to recover. I also collect medicinal herbs, make different tinctures, and give them to people. It helps a lot, but there's no magic in it, so don't be afraid of me. And now let's go. I will serve you delicious tea and bake pancakes with sour cream and raspberry jam," she finished. The girl looked sadly at Bethany and walked silently beside her. Mrs. Fletcher was silent too. Each of them was thinking of something heavy, something innermost. The village people had always been eager to believe all sorts of tales, so they slandered Mrs. Fletcher, and she knew it. There were rumors in the villages that she was fabulously wealthy, but that wasn't really the case. She never demanded money for treatment. If people felt it necessary to thank her for the treatment, they could pay, but as much as they considered appropriate. Sometimes instead of money, they would bring her groceries or other goodies, tea or chocolates. She kept some for herself, but mostly she gave it all to the neighbors and their grandchildren, or just the local kids. Mrs. Fletcher provided treatment free of charge. She sincerely wanted to help people so that they would remember her as a kind and sympathetic person. Everything else was nothing. She knew it was impossible to take the wealth into the afterlife. Daisy had other things on her mind. She thought Mrs. Fletcher was scary and evil, but she turned out to be kind. She smiled and even invited her over for tea. Perhaps people lied about her being a witch, but what should the girl do now? Should she go back to Adam and Eloise again? The girl suddenly felt like crying, and she sighed. "Dear, are you tired?" Mrs. Fletcher asked. "No, I'm just wondering what I should do with my life," said the girl. "Listen, Daisy, here's what you and I are going to do. I have a neighbor, Stanley, and he's a police officer. I treated his mother, and if I ask him, he will help. Stay with me for a few days and have some rest. In the meantime, Stanley's going to see your aunt. He'll tell Eloise where you are so she won't be worried. And if you like staying with me, you can stay as long as you like. I'd be happy. I only have a cat. I don't even have a dog. So we'll live together," said the old woman. Daisy laughed happily and nodded, but suddenly stopped. "Oh," she exclaimed, "I completely forgot. When I was walking here, I saw a dog in the woods. A huge dog. He was howling. Someone had tied him to a tree with a rope, and he was covered in blood. He must have been beaten," Daisy told her. "I can't believe that," the old woman wondered. "This is so cruel. Who would do that? Daisy, do you remember that place?" "I do," the girl nodded. "Okay, let's bring the bags now. I'll get some rest, and we'll go find that poor dog. But you have to show me the place." It took at least an hour before Daisy and Mrs. Fletcher found that tree. A big, white, wounded dog was there. While softly talking to him, Mrs. Fletcher approached the dog, gently stroked him, and quickly examined the dog's front paw. The paw was swollen, apparently broken. The old lady poured some milk from a bottle into the bowl she took with her and gave it to the unfortunate animal. The dog's tongue was swollen. He was dying of hunger and thirst. It took a while for the dog to start drinking the milk, but then, despite some difficulty, he emptied the bowl. Mrs. Fletcher, meanwhile, cut the rope around the dog's neck and beckoned him to follow her. "Come on, come with us. We can't carry you, but we can make it home quietly," the old woman said. The dog seemed to understand what to do. Shakily got up and followed Bethany and Daisy slowly. Their journey home was very long. They had to stop from time to time so they could rest because the dog could hardly move on three paws. But the long walk was behind them, and the three of them finished their meal and went to sleep to regain their strength. Days went by, and Daisy was still living at Bethany's. Thanks to Stanley, Daisy joined the local school. Eloise wasn't worried about her niece. She was happy that the girl left. Now the woman enjoyed her life without thinking of Daisy at all. Mrs. Fletcher nursed the dog, and he turned out to be a huge, beautiful, fluffy dog. They began to call him Jack, and he settled into a big, warm barn. He slept there, guarding his owners. "Life is an amazing thing," the old woman smiled. "Not long ago, I lived alone, and now I have a granddaughter and a dog." 5 years have passed since then. Late one night, Daisy fed the dog, played with him, and headed for the house, not noticing 3 silhouettes flickering behind her from the fence. And just as she pulled the door open, a huge bearded man threw the girl back against the wall. "Where's your grandma?" he muttered, and 2 other men who looked just like him showed up behind him. They began to rummage all over the house, opening all the cupboards and pouring out all the contents, and the bearded man ran into a side room and dragged the frightened Bethany out. "Who are you guys? What do you need?" she asked. "Don't you recognize me? It's me, Andrew, your stepson. You must have long forgotten I existed," the big man muttered. "Andrew? No way, you don't look like him at all. Andrew was blonde and short, and you are a redhead and tall," said the old woman. "You're not out of your mind yet, old witch. A year ago, Andrew died in prison. We were planning a prison break together, and he told me he had a house in the countryside. He died of tuberculosis himself, but we are alive and well, as you can see. Now listen to me. There's a lot of talk about you. They say your wealth is hidden somewhere. You don't want to die in a horrible way. Show me your stashes. Then you'll live. And we will take your granddaughter with us. She'll be kind of security grantor. We do not promise to bring her back safe and sound." The big man laughed and turned to the girl, but there was no one at the place where he pushed her. The fugitive cursed at his companions for not keeping an eye on the girl, and they began to check the rooms trying to find Daisy, but she was nowhere to be found. Bethany laughed happily. "Well done, Daisy. So you've missed the little girl. She has outwitted you cleverly," the old woman muttered. The bearded man turned to her and slapped her on the cheek with all his might. Bethany groaned and fell to the floor, but he immediately picked up the groaning woman and set her on her feet again. "Give me the money and jewels, now," the fugitive threatened. "Do you think I keep it all in the house? Everything is in the barn, buried in the ground," the old woman replied. "Look at her. She's about to die, and she's got a treasure buried in the barn. Come on, show us the way," said the big man. Mrs. Fletcher rubbed a bruised cheek and back, went out into the yard, approached the barn, and opened the door. "It's all buried over there in the right corner. The shovels are there too." Mrs. Fletcher pointed the opposite way from the dog, so they wouldn't notice Jack right away. The other two fugitives, pushing each other, rushed into the barn, and their bearded leaders stayed in the doorway. "Look, there's gold jewelry in the jug. I got it from my great-grandmother," Mrs. Fletcher lied to him. "You better hurry or your friends will take it away and you won't get anything." Mrs. Fletcher continued to lie, luring the bearded man into the barn. The fugitive stepped into the barn, and then Mrs. Fletcher deftly closed the door with a latch and shouted, "Get them, Jack! Get them!" And then there was a scream and the barking of the big dog. At that moment, a few men and policeman Stanley rushed to the barn. More people rushed in from other streets. Daisy informed everyone of the attack. She knocked on every door and shouted that she and her grandmother had been attacked by fugitives. As they opened the barn and illuminated it with lanterns, they saw a terrible sight. One of the fugitives was rolling on the ground and screaming in pain near the wall, and the other was crawling away, dragging his wounded leg behind him. But the bearded man and Jack fought a deadly battle. Suddenly there was a screech of a dog, and then the bearded man wheezed something and dropped dead as Jack bit his throat. Mrs. Fletcher, seeing the wounded dog, rushed to him and began to examine his wounded body. The fugitive managed to stab the dog a couple of times, and now Jack was whimpering, resting his head in his elderly mistress's lap. The people in the village couldn't calm down. As the police car drove the fugitives away, Stanley came up to Mrs. Fletcher and said, "I've already called my brothers. He's a vet, and he's on his way right now. If Jack can be saved, he'll do everything for him." The old woman sighed, embraced Daisy, and cried. Only now she felt real fear. 2 weeks went by, and Jack was slowly recovering, pleasing his owners. Mrs. Fletcher and Daisy stayed close to their rescuer, fed him his favorite treats, and carefully healed his wounds. The dog looked at them gratefully and, crawling over, laid his big head on his grandmother's hands, and then on the girl's lap. It was as if he was showing them that even in this condition, he was ready to protect them. And they knew it. This is a story of life. What do you think of it? Let me know in the comments section below. Share the story with your friends. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. "Still here?" Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. "I'm leaving." I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? Alright, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.